Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with New Year's Baby Porchetta. That's right, for centuries, pork has been served on New Year's to symbolize progress and prosperity. And there's a very good reason for that. And that would be the fact that pigs never move backwards. It's true, pigs are always rooting forward and perpetually moving forward. You know, like time. Plus, they're also very delicious, so this works on several levels. And what we need to do to start what's basically a miniaturized porchetta recipe is to create our garlic herb spice rub, which I will be doing in my olive wood mortar. And we'll begin by crushing some whole fennel seeds. So we will toss those in and give them a brief pounding. And that's not because you can't eat these whole. You can and do every time you eat Italian sausage. But by crushing these a little bit first, we really release all those beautiful flavors from the fennel seed. Which, by the way, if you're doing this, will smell amazing. So we'll work those over for about a minute before adding the rest of the ingredients, which includes a whole bunch of sliced garlic, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And then we're also going to need some herb. And I'm doing two. I'm doing some sage leaves, which I've sliced up, as well as some freshly chopped rosemary. We will also want a little bit of citrus zest. As you can see, I'm going with lemon, but orange or a combination of both would also be nice. And then let's go ahead and finish this off with some chili flakes, as well as, of course, some kosher salt. And once we have all that together, what we'll do is crush this for about a minute or two to form basically a coarse paste. So, of course, this has been edited. It's going to take you a couple minutes, but we'll want to smush and smash that until we have something that looks about like this. At which point, we'll finish this off with a splash of olive oil. And once that's been drizzled in, we'll grind that for another minute, at which point our garlic herb spice paste should be done. And I really do love everything about using a mortar for this step, except they're really hard to film because you can't really see what's going on in there. But good news, you're going to get a great look at that texture when we spread it over our pork, which is going to be the next step, as soon as we prep our pork tenderloin. And there it is. What I have here is a 1 pound, fully trimmed pork tenderloin, which is how I buy mine. And yours is probably going to come in a similar condition. And other than possibly trimming off a little bit of silver skin, it should be pretty much ready to go. And the only thing we're going to do to prep this for our spice rub is to cut a pocket with a thin, sharp knife, right down the center, about 75% of the way through. But I don't like to do the entire length. Okay, we want to leave the ends sans gash. So we'll leave about an inch on either end uncut. And like I said, we'll cut about 75% of the way through to form a pocket, as shown. So that is looking just about perfect right there. Although I really should probably turn that, so it's easier to work with. And then what we'll do is transfer in about a tablespoon of our rub and spread that into our newly formed pocket. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, if these particular rub ingredients don't turn you on, this video is really more of a technique and will pretty much work no matter what you use in this. All right, you are, after all, the Bob Dylan of your filling, so feel free to adapt. And then what we'll do once we spread about a tablespoon inside is close that back up and transfer the rest over the top. And we'll go ahead and spread that as evenly as we can on both sides. And please, you're going to want to use your hands here, as no other tool will work as well. And then what we're going to do once we have all our garlic and spice mixture spread over evenly is wrap this in strips of bacon. So we'll start at the end, and we'll wrap this in strips of bacon, ideally starting and ending with a seam underneath the loin, which hopefully is going to help keep them in place. Okay, so a real porchetta is made with pork loin wrapped in pork belly. So here, to miniaturize it, we're going with the much smaller pork tenderloin, and then instead of wrapping with the whole belly, we'll simply wrap in these strips of bacon, which, in case you didn't know, is sliced pork belly. And as far as starting and ending with the seams on the bottom, that worked great for the first two, but with this third one, because the piece was a little smaller and the pork loin was a little thicker, my strip ended on top. So what I decided to do was simply trap it by placing another one over the top, which totally worked to keep it in place. But as you'll see later, where we doubled up that bacon, it didn't quite cook as much as I wanted. But anyway, we'll get into that later. So we'll go ahead and cover our tenderloin with bacon strips from one end to the other. Like I said, somehow ending up with the seams on the bottom. And then once that's set, I'm pretty sure we could cook it right away if we had to. But what I'm highly suggesting is wrapping it up and popping it in the fridge for about an hour to chill it thoroughly and to give it time for those flavors to mingle. Plus, since this was the first time I'd tried this miniature version, I was worried about the loin inside overcooking by the time the bacon cooked on the outside. So I thought chilling it would help that situation, since the inside would be a little colder and take a little longer to cook. But anyway, I did wrap mine up and pop it in the fridge for about 60 minutes, at which point we are ready to roast. And what we'll want to do is unwrap that and transfer it onto a very lightly oiled, foil-lined baking sheet. Okay, I'm using a half pan, but a full sheet pan will work beautifully. And then what we'll do once our baby porchetta has been successfully panned up is transfer that into the center of a very hot 450-degree oven for about 25 minutes or so, or until our probe reads 134. At which point it should look something like this. And no, 134 internal temp is not cooked enough. But as this sits and rests for at least 10 minutes or so, that internal temp is going to climb to somewhere between 140 and 145, which is absolutely perfect. And if you don't believe me, wait until we slice this open. So I definitely let mine sit and rest for about 10 minutes. And instead of just staring at it doing nothing, I decided to grab my blowtorch and give that outside surface a little bit extra color. Okay, while this is a brilliant technique for creating juicy, flavorful pork tenderloin, it's not necessarily a brilliant technique for creating gorgeous bacon. Okay, if we waited for that bacon to crisp up, our pork inside would be way, way overcooked. So I did cheat a little bit here. But as they say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And then once our baby porchetta is rested at least 10 minutes, we are able to slice in and see how we did. And how did we do? Check it out. That is about as perfect as you could hope to cook a pork tenderloin. Plus, it's wrapped with bacon. So that just came out amazingly well, and I really do want a piece right now. But I don't want to wreck a big piece. I want to save those for the picture. So let me try a little end cut here, which was nothing short of insanely delicious and shockingly porchetta-like. So I went ahead and sliced up a proper portion and served it with a little Italian white bean ragu. And then I took way too many pictures and the meat got cold. But I ate it anyway and enjoyed every not hot but incredible bite. And besides the gorgeous appearance and flavor, this was so incredibly tender, as you can tell since I'm cutting it with a fork with little or no effort. And yes, in case you're wondering, you can deglaze a foil-lined pan. I just splashed a little water on it while it was still hot and gave it a little stir and spooned it over. So if you want, you could just use some natural pan juices, or something like a salsa verde, or an aioli, or nothing, since this really is so incredibly flavorful and really doesn't need much. But anyway, that's it, my New Year's baby porchetta. For a first attempt, I just loved how this came out. Although next time I think I will experiment trying to get that bacon cooked a little more. Most of it was fine, but the places where it overlapped was a little undercooked. So as cooks, even though we're happy with how something came out, we should always be looking for ways to improve it. Okay, the key is to always try to be happy, but never satisfied. In fact, I think I'm going to make that my New Year's resolution. To be happy yet not satisfied in 2017. Hey, that's better than clean out the garage. But anyway, let me finish up by wishing you all a very happy and healthy New Year, filled with progress and prosperity, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. New Year's good luck pasta fazool. That's right, it is a proven unscientific fact that eating pork, beans, or greens at the beginning of a new year brings you great luck. So just imagine what happens if we put all three of those things together in the same dish like we're doing here. All right, in that case, we're not talking about the kind of good luck where you buy a lottery ticket thinking you have a better chance of winning. We're talking about the kind of good luck where you don't even need to win the lottery. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by throwing a whole bunch of sliced up bacon into a cold soup pot that we will place over medium heat. And what we'll do is cook this stirring for as long as it takes for most of that fat to render out and for that bacon just to start to crisp up. And by the way, any kind of pork here will work and bring you good luck. So if you're not into bacon and would rather use something like pancetta or fresh pork, or even a pork sausage, go ahead. I mean, you guys are after all the RuPauls of your pasta fazool calls. But since we have beans and greens going in this, I do like that little bit of smokiness the bacon provides. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and cook that until most of the fat renders out. And how you can tell you're getting close is by remembering a very old Food Wish saying, which is once your bacon starts to look foamy, it's almost done, homie. Okay, so once yours looks a little something like this, that has probably gone far enough. And at this point, if we want, we can remove some of that excess fat, which, as you know, I like to do with a wadded up paper towel. And using some tongs, I'll just go ahead and tilt the pan until most of that fat gets soaked up. And then we'll just very carefully transfer that into a cup. And to me, that's just a very fast and easy way to remove some of that fat. And don't worry, we still have about a tablespoon or two in there, with which to saute our onions and celery, which, by the way, are the next ingredients we will add, along with a nice big pinch of salt. And we'll saute those for about 6 or 7 minutes, or until they start to soften up, and those onions begin to turn translucent. So that is looking pretty good right there. And then once you feel that's cooked long enough, we'll go ahead and toss in some freshly ground black pepper, a few shakes of cayenne, a little bit of dry thyme, a little bit of dry oregano, and then a couple tablespoons of tomato paste. And then once all that's in there, we'll go ahead and give it a stir and cook it for about 2 minutes or so, just so that tomato paste toasts a little bit onto the bottom of the pan. Okay, I think that little bit of caramelization really helps bring out more flavor. So we will cook that stirring for a couple minutes before tossing in some minced garlic. And we'll go ahead and saute that for about a minute or two, just to take off that raw edge and infuse that bacon fat with some garlicky goodness. And then once that's set, we can go ahead and add our cooking liquids, which for me is going to be a quart of good quality chicken broth, or stock, same thing, as well as I'm also going to add a cup of water. And yes, of course you could just add 5 cups of chicken broth, but I really didn't want to open up another container just to get another cup. But anyway, we'll go ahead and stir that in, and then we'll turn our heat up to high and bring this up to a simmer. And then once that mixture is bubbling, we'll back our heat down to medium, and we'll let that simmer just like that while we prep our greens. And for this, I ended up using a nice big large bunch of Swiss chard. And the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and strip those leaves off those really tough, thick center stems. Okay, so I usually start at the bottom and just sort of rip up towards the top until all I'm left with are those nice tender leaves. And by the way, the Swiss chard has not been washed yet. All right, as you're about to see, I think it's much better to wash this after you cut it. Okay, so what we'll do once that's been destemmed is go ahead and wad up a handful at a time, and then very carefully slice them across one way. And then we'll turn them and slice them across the other way. And by the way, if there's a spot in this recipe where you're going to cut yourself, this would be it. Okay, these leaves are very fluffy and distracting. So as you're maneuvering them, make sure your fingers stay away from the blade. So we will carefully and safely slice those one way and then the other, which is going to produce some fairly small pieces, which I think is going to fit a lot better on your spoon than a long piece. But anyway, suit yourself. Maybe you want a nice long piece of greens flopping off your spoon and burning your chin. But personally, I think bite size is best. And then what we'll do once those are chopped is transfer them into a large bowl, which we will then fill up with water so that we can give these a thorough washing. And the great thing about dirt and sand is that it will always fall to the bottom of the bowl. So after we've swished those around for a while, what we'll do is grab a handful at a time and transfer those into another bowl. And that way any sand that was attached will fall to the bottom of the bowl. And that's it, our greens have been successfully chopped and washed, which means we can go ahead and stir them into our pot. And then what we'll do once those have been successfully submerged is let those simmer for about 10 minutes or so, or until those greens start getting nice and tender. And of course, we're going to adjust our seasonings at the end, but braised greens do need a good amount of salt. So after stirring those in, I am going to add a nice big pinch here. Oh, and I should mention, when I gave the time of simmering for about 10 minutes, that would be if you're using Swiss chard, which is a relatively tender green. Okay, if you use something like kale or collard greens, you're probably going to have to give them a little more time. But you'll know because you'll be checking them. And you'll be like, hey, these greens are tender. I think I can move on to the next step, which would be adding 1 can of drained, but not rinsed, cannellini beans, or any bean for that matter. And we will go ahead and stir those in. And then, very important, raise our heat to high, because before we add our pasta, we want this mixture boiling. So we'll go ahead and crank up that heat. And then as soon as our pot is bubbling like this, we can go ahead and add our pasta. And I usually use elbow macaroni for my pasta fazool, but this time I went with orchetti, which means little ears, since someone a very, very long time ago in Italy thought that's what these look like. And they kind of do. But anyway, we'll go ahead and stir that in. And then we'll cook this stirring occasionally for about 12 to 15 minutes, or until our pasta gets tender. And of course your times may vary, depending on what you use. And as you well know, there's no guessing in the kitchen. So we'll go ahead and grab a spoon and give it a test. And as you can see, that orchetti is the perfect shape for holding a bean. But anyway, I gave it a taste and it was cooked perfectly. And besides checking the doneness of the pasta, we also want to test at this point for seasoning. And I determined mine needed a little more salt, and yours probably will too. So I stirred that in and gave it one last taste. And that's it. Once we're happy with it, we can go ahead and grab a ladle and serve it up. And by the way, for whatever reason it gets too thick, you can always add another splash of broth or water. All right, that's just you cooking. But mine was exactly as thick as I wanted, which is pretty thick. So I went ahead and served some up, preferably next to some nice crusty toasted bread. And then as far as a few finishing touches, I went ahead and garnished the top with a little bit of grated Parmesan, as well as a little drizzle of olive oil. And then last but not least, a little pinch of red pepper flake. And that's it. Our New Year's good luck pasta Fazool is ready to enjoy. And yes, for the record, we are pronouncing it and spelling it wrong. It's really, of course, pasta Fagioli. But why would you say that when you could say pasta Fazool? It's just one of those things that makes you happy to say. But anyway, let me go ahead and dig in. And that, my friends, is just a magnificent bowl of comfort food. In fact, this is so satisfying and so delicious. Even if I knew this would bring me bad luck, I would still make it. That's how good this is. But don't worry, it doesn't. It brings nothing but great luck. And that I can guarantee. Oh, and speaking of New Year's, if one of your resolutions was to learn to cook this year, this is a fantastic dish to start with, since it is very simple and straightforward, yet combines a lot of different techniques you're going to want to master. All right, just simply make this recipe like 5 or 6 times, using different meats and different greens and different vegetables and different beans. And then after that, you will pretty much know how to cook. But whether you are brand new to cooking or very, very experienced and overconfident like me, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for all the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Roast Tenderloin of Beef. Of course this is super expensive, but look on the bright side. If you screw it up, you'll feel bad for weeks. But don't worry, I'm going to show you a method that's so easy, so foolproof, you're going to be shocked at how awesome your beef comes out. So we're going to start this off with a 2.5 to 3 pound tenderloin roast. This one comes from what they call the butt end. All right, it's the largest end of the tenderloin. And because of its size, it makes a really nice roast. And it also tends to be a little less expensive than the classic center cut tenderloin roasts, which are also sometimes called Chateaubriand. So we have a little bit of prep to do. We're going to remove what's called the silver skin, which is, yes, that shiny, silvery, white skin. So you want to take a thin, sharp knife, all right, go underneath. You only want to get that silver skin. Do not cut into the meat too far. All right, so be careful. So I'm going to remove any obvious silver skin from the top. And it's pretty easy to see. But on that side, between those two little muscles, I don't want you digging down too deep. All right, you'll see when we slice this, it's not a problem. That fat really doesn't go in there too deeply. On the other side, there's a piece of meat attached, which they call the chain. And I want to leave it attached to the roast. But any of that external fat, like you see there, I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. So tenderloin is a really lean piece of meat, so we can leave a little bit of that white fat on there. But the tough part, the silver skin, you want to remove that. And I'm going to cut that little chunk of fat out there. But that's pretty much it. I'm going to flip it over. So on this side, there should just be a little bit of trimming required. So I'm going to slice that off. If I see any more silver skin, I'm going to take that off. And that is trimmed and ready to tie. All right, so we're going to take some butcher's string, and we're going to do a classic kind of trussing method. I'm going to start off by tying one end down, and then I'm going to just make a simple loop with the string, bring it over the loin, and just kind of cinch it up. And as you pull, it actually will tighten up beautifully. All right, so let's see another one here. So I just loop the string over, just like that. Bring it all the way over the loin, and then you simply center it and give it a little tug, and that string will cinch up. And you keep doing that every inch or two, and that's going to hold everything together nice and tight and allow for it to roast really evenly. Okay, so when you get to the end and you've made your last tie, flip it over and bring the string along the bottom. I'm going to loop it under once there, and I'm just going to tie that off where I started. And that's done. By the way, if you're getting this from a butcher, they will do all this trimming and tying for you. It costs a little extra, of course, but they'll do it. All right, so my beef tenderloin is prepped and ready to start. But before we start the cooking process, I have one more thing to prep because I'm doing a shallot and porcini mushroom sauce. I need to soak my dry porcini. We pour over water, we let it soak until it's soft, which will take about an hour. If you use warm water, it goes faster. Once they're soft, squeeze them out and chop in bite-sized pieces. Don't throw away the water. All right, I'm going to reserve that until I need it. All right, so when we're ready to start cooking the beef, I'm going to season that very, very generously with salt and freshly cracked black pepper. I'm going to put a heavy skillet on high heat. All right, a little bit of vegetable oil, and I'm going to sear that really well on all sides. I want a very brown crust, and I also want a nice fond in the bottom of the pan. And the fond, of course, you know, is that caramelized meat juice on the bottom. So I'm going to stay on medium-high to high heat the whole way here until I have a perfectly seared roast. When that happens, I'm going to remove the beef to a plate. I'm going to turn the heat down to medium. I'm going to throw in a chunk of butter, and I'm going to add lots of shallots and a pinch of salt. Now, what's going to happen? The liquid from the shallots is going to actually deglaze that fond from the bottom of the pan. I want to cook those shallots in that butter for about 5-6 minutes, all right, until they start to turn golden brown. At that point, I'm going to deglaze the pan with tarragon vinegar. If you don't have that, you can just use regular white wine vinegar. You could even use white wine if you want. But I do want a little bit of acidity. You're going to pour that in, stir it around. It's going to evaporate pretty quickly. And when it looks like that, I'm going to go ahead and pour in some stock or broth. I'm using chicken. Veal stock, if you can get it, really is what you want to use here. But if not, I suggest a nice, high-quality chicken broth. All right. At that point, I'm going to add in my diced porcini mushroom. All right, I'm going to toss in some salt and pepper. We're going to adjust that at the end, but I'm going to put in a little bit here. And because this is a special occasion and we want it a little bit more luxurious, I'm going to put in a splash of heavy cream and then a big splash of the water we soaked the mushrooms in. Of course, I strained it because it could have sand in it. So strain it, a splash of that. All right, I'm going to toss my beef back in. I'm going to toss it around in that sauce a little bit. And that's going to go in a 325-degree oven until it reaches an internal temperature of 125. That's for a perfect medium rare, a little bit on the rare side. So mine took about 45 minutes at 325. And because you're roasting it very gently, you're going to get a perfect tenderloin that's evenly cooked throughout, a perfect pink. All right, I'm going to remove my tenderloin to a plate, cover loosely with foil, and that has to rest at least 10 minutes while we finish our sauce, which is quite simple because it's already been roasting with the tenderloin. All right, I'm simply going to put that on high heat, bring it up to a boil. When I'm happy with the consistency, I'm going to turn off the heat. I'm going to toss in some salt and pepper. I'm going to throw in our traditional chunk of cold butter, stir that in. When it's almost melted, the last ingredient, a big, giant pinch of fresh tarragon. And of course, tarragon is a main flavoring in béarnaise, which is a very popular sauce for roast beef tenderloin. All right, you're going to taste for salt and pepper, and that sauce is done. So simple, so amazingly elegant and delicious. So of course, you're going to cut the string off your tenderloin. You're going to place it back on the sauce if you want, maybe some more herb, maybe surround it with potatoes, and bring it to the table just like that. All right, so that would be one way, family style. Or you can slice it up ahead of time and just plate it up individually. And look at that perfectly cooked and juicy beef tenderloin. I'm telling you, that slow oven and cooking it on top of the sauce really does magical things to this piece of beef. All right, so I'm going to put a little sauce down. I'm going to put my sliced beef right on top of there. That is just beautiful. So anyway, there you go. A simple, easy method for roasting a tenderloin of beef. You can see how perfectly cooked that comes out. And when I cut into that, it was literally like butter. Just so soft, succulent, perfect. That sauce with that little bit of sharpness from the vinegar, the aromatic tarragon, the sweetness from the shallots, that little bit of richness from the cream and butter. Just a magnificent combination. So anyway, if you're splurging for a special occasion roast, this beef tenderloin procedure will produce a very impressive piece of meat. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more information as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Utica greens and beans. That's right, every year for New Year's Day, we try to do some kind of recipe involving beans and greens. And why beans and greens on New Year's Day, you may ask? Because as any scientist will tell you, if you eat poor on the first day of the year, you will enjoy incredible financial prosperity the rest of the year. I mean, think about it, totally makes sense, right? And this year's offering is inspired by a recipe called Utica greens, which you'll read a lot more about on the blog. But for now, we better get to prepping. And the star of the show is escarole. I have 2 heads here, and you know we've used this before for many a delicious recipe, and it's very easy to prep. You're simply going to trim that bottom off, which is going to release all those individual leaves, and then you're going to take a handful of those individual leaves and kind of wad them up and just slice them across like that into kind of large pieces. You know the drill. Decide on a size and stick with it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut up 2 heads of escarole. And what we're going to need to do is wash those very carefully. So I'm going to put them in a big bowl of cold water. And I did mine twice. There's usually a lot of sand and siltness. All right, so we're going to give that stuff a very thorough washing. And then we're going to blanch it very briefly in salted water. So generously salt some water, bring it to a boil. And once it comes to a boil, we're going to go ahead and add our escarole. And we're only going to cook this for about 2 minutes. All right, it's not even really cooking. We're just sort of wilting it a little. Now, you see some recipes say boil it for like 5 or 6 minutes until it's kind of tender, but I don't really like that. All right, this is a dish that gets finished under the broiler, so I don't want to cook it too far here. So just like 2 minutes, and then we're going to fish it out into a bowl. And then to stop the cooking process, we're going to go ahead and run cold water over that. All right, you don't really need ice water, just cold water will do. Like I said, that's going to stop the cooking, and then we'll simply let that drain on the side until needed. And it's on to the pancetta phase. So in a big skillet with a little touch of olive oil, I'm going to go ahead and crisp up some pancetta. And I'm going to use medium heat here pretty much throughout. Now, a lot of people, especially in Utica, use prosciutto, but I really do prefer the pancetta for this. I like to get this fairly crisp. To me, you lose that beautiful caramelized pork flavor, and it can get a little funky, but I really do like the pancetta here. And as you can see, we're going to cook that fairly well. And then what we're going to do when our pancetta or prosciutto looks like that, we're going to add some kind of hot pepper. Now, I'm going to use jalapeno because it's winter, and I can't really get those nice summer hot long Italian peppers, but pretty much anything's going to work here. And obviously, if you want to use something sweeter and milder like a bell pepper, go for it. But anyway, you'll figure it out. It's just peppers. And I just gave mine kind of a rustic chop, rustic being a euphemism for not caring what they look like. And we're going to cook those in that hot pancetta oil for just a couple minutes, just till they start to soften, at which point we're going to add another mandatory ingredient, a whole bunch of chopped garlic. Now be careful, we don't want this to brown. So I'm going to give this, let's say, a 1-minute sizzle. And then we're going to go ahead and pour in a cup of chicken stock or broth, and we're going to go ahead and bring that up to a simmer. And while we do, I'm going to give it a couple pinches of black pepper and some salt. As usual, your job description will include adjusting the seasoning. And as soon as that mixture starts simmering, we are ready to finish the dish. So to do that, we're going to add our greens back in, but before we do, I'm going to add one bonus ingredient that is not in the original, beans. And I'm using cooked cranberry beans here, also known as borlotti beans. I think that's what they are in Italian. So I'm going to stir those in. Those are obviously already cooked. And then at that point, we're going to go ahead and dump in our drained escarole. And we'll take a spoon and we'll mix that up so everything's kind of evenly distributed, or some might say distributed. And then right here, let's go ahead and turn off our heat. And then the final step, what really makes Utica greens, the gratin topping. So we're going to sprinkle in about a half cup of plain breadcrumbs. Do not use panko. Do not use anything fancy. You just want very fine, plain, generic, cheap breadcrumbs. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our spoon and mix that in, but not thoroughly. I do not want full integration. So you see how I'm using the tip of the spoon? I don't want you pressing and packing everything down. All right, I want to be able to see a little bit of that breadcrumb on the greens, on the beans. All right, so that looks perfect. I can still see a little breadcrumb. At that point, I'm going to give it a little shake of red pepper flakes or cayenne. I went with red pepper flakes. I don't want to be pigeonholed. And then after that little shot of extra pepper, a tiny, tiny dusting of extra breadcrumb. We're not going to mix this one in. I just want to kind of dry the top off a little bit. In preparation of the last couple ingredients, which are some finely grated Parmesan cheese. Of course, we're using the Parmigiano Reggiano, as we always do. And we're going to give that a thorough dusting. You pretty much want to cover the surface. And at this point, we're going to preheat our broiler to high. We're going to finish with a light drizzling of olive oil. And then that's going to go under a hot broiler until the top is golden brown. And I'd love to tell you how long that takes, but I can't. Depends on how far away you are from the flame and how hot your broiler is. But you don't need times when you have eyes, because you're simply going to look at it and you'll tell when it's done. So I looked at mine here and I was like, that's getting close. But I think I want it to go a little longer. So I left it in another couple minutes. And I looked at it again and it looked like this. And I was like, hey, that's done. So I took it out. I brought it into some marginally better light. And that Utica greens plus beans is done. And let me tell you, we've probably done at least 4 or 5 beans and greens type dishes on the blog. And this not only is my new favorite, but more importantly, my wife Michelle's favorite. So this definitely got her stamp of approval, and there's no mystery why. It is so delicious, so nutritious, and so easy, there's just nothing not to like about it. And yes, the original Utica greens does not have beans, but since beans with greens is such a classic combination, it totally works. And while I generally use this as a side dish, in this case with some beautiful dried Italian sausage, it is certainly satisfying enough and flavorful enough to be its own main course. But anyway, like I said, you make this on New Year's Day, you eat this, and then the rest of the year will bring you untold fortunes. And how much specifically should you expect? I can't tell you, it's untold. But not knowing is all part of the fun. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with hot bacon dressing. That's right, not only am I going to show you one of my favorite salad dressings of all time, but we're going to show you a special New Year's Day salad of spinach and black-eyed peas that actually brings you prosperity and good fortune. All right, more about that later. Right now, it's all about the hot bacon dressing. So I'm going to start by thickly slicing up a half a pound of good quality smoked bacon, nice big pieces. I'm going to put that in a cold saute pan with a little bit of vegetable oil, put that over medium heat, and cook that crisp. All right, so we're doing two things here. We're, of course, cooking the bacon, but we're also producing an incredibly flavorful bacon fat-infused oil to make the dressing with. So we're going to continue cooking on medium until the bacon is all the way cooked. It'll look like that. You know what crispy bacon looks like. When the bacon's ready, I want you to transfer it to a strainer set over a bowl. We want both things. We want the pieces of crispy bacon, of course, but we also want that oil underneath for the dressing. All right, so just reserve those two things. We're going to go back to the pan, which is now empty, and toss in our minced onion, put it back on medium heat. I'm going to drizzle in about a teaspoon of that bacon fat with a pinch of salt, and we're going to saute those onions for about 5 minutes until golden brown. All right, once the onions are soft and sweet, I'm going to add some garlic. I'm going to saute that for 1 minute. We don't want to brown the garlic. And then we're going to add our vinegars. So I'm going to go with apple cider vinegar and rice vinegar. We're also going to add some water. And because this is a sweet and tangy dressing, we're going to add some sugar. So I'm going to stir that in. Next in goes 2 heaping spoons of Dijon mustard. Not the yellow mustard, please. Get some Dijon mustard. I don't have anything against yellow mustard, as long as it's only used on hot dogs. All right, once the mustard is mixed in, we're going to raise the heat up to medium-high. Bring this up to a simmer, okay? At this point, I'm going to grind in a whole bunch of black pepper, because this dressing really should be nice and peppery. And then we're going to thicken this up a little bit using some cornstarch. So very simple, a teaspoon of cornstarch with a couple teaspoons of cold water. All right, mix it up, go back over to your pan, make sure you got the whisk in one hand, and you're going to drizzle in the cornstarch with the other. And that's going to thicken up really quickly, all right, like within a minute. And it's going to look like that. At that point, I want you to turn the heat down to low and drizzle in 1/3 cup of our bacon drippings. All right, so that's that oil we cooked the bacon in. You're going to stir that in. Because of the acidity of the dressing and because it's been thickened with the cornstarch, that oil, that bacon fat's going to emulsify right into this beautifully, and you're going to have this gorgeous, thick, glossy dressing. All right, remember the heat's on low. Last but not least, we're going to toss in our cooked bacon, and then it's pretty much done. We're going to taste and adjust for seasoning. By the way, use a spoon. Nobody wants your grubby finger in their dressing, especially twice. All right, so I checked mine. Not surprisingly, it needed adjusting. So I cracked in some more black pepper. All right, I gave it a shot of cayenne. I like this dressing a little on the spicy side. And a big pinch of salt. Make sure this has enough salt, otherwise it will be flat. And that is one finished hot bacon dressing. All right, our dressing is done, and while it's still hot, we are going to dress our spinach salad. And as I said earlier, this is a special New Year's Day salad. Greens and beans, very traditional on New Year's Day. They bring good luck. You'll have to read the blog post where I explain. But I'm going to add a handful of black-eyed peas to this baby spinach. You can use freshly cooked black-eyed peas. This is just canned that I rinsed and drained. I'm also going to add in some sliced raw mushrooms and cherry tomatoes. So obviously I'm just tossing one salad here, but I'll give you the ingredients for 6 on the blog. I'm going to spoon over my hot bacon dressing, and it is hot. You can tell by the steam. I'm going to quickly stir that in. Now the dressing's hot, but the salad's not really hot. So you want to work quickly. You want to toss it. I'm going to put that in a bowl. All right, maybe put a little extra of that hot dressing on there. And that is one gorgeous, gorgeous salad. So anyway, if one of your New Year's resolutions is
try to get more bacon in my diet in 2012, then hopefully this will help. It was really, really good. Smoky, spicy, sweet, tangy. There's nothing not delicious about it. I mean, if you haven't had one of these, you have to try. It's just as simple as that. So go to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.